there's lots of other things you would rather be doing on a summer afternoon that's 107 degrees outside than being in here. So for those of you who don't know us, we're Champions for Children. I'm going to tell you a little bit about who we are and why we are here and what you would expect to hear this afternoon. We are hosting this event. We are a membership-based network of women whose mission it is to raise awareness, raise funds, and make an impact related to children's mental health. And we are driven by a vision that we hope you will also get inspired by, of a world where every child has access to the resources they need to learn, grow, and thrive. So we are so excited about this panel today. This is the second one we've had this year. We had one in February on digital childhoods. You can imagine what that was all about, right? Social media. And we had lots to talk about. And now we're here talking about the role of parents as really the frontline influencers, if you will, to use the term, in our children's lives related to their mental health. So really excited about this topic. So let's talk a minute about why we're here. So I have this relationship with ChatGPT. We're good friends. And everybody who knows me knows I don't do anything without checking with ChatGPT. So I asked ChatGPT, what's going on in the world right now that could be impacting our children's mental health? And so here's what they had to say about that. That there's a lot of uncertainty in global conflict, right? So a lot of unrest going on that our children are absorbing from the world around them. Gun violence, we know about that in schools, and safety fears. So children are very concerned about violence in their communities. Climate change and natural disasters. You can imagine the anxiety that our children are feeling when you watch what's happening in Texas and things like that. Economic stress, so there's economic hardships. We were talking before we started today about the number of folks who have lost their jobs, particularly in this region. Don't get your children, don't realize that, understand that. I have a good friend who's a first grade teacher who says that there are kids in her classroom crying all the time because of what their parents are going through. The overuse and digital overload, social media, and then access to gaps in mental health. So we've made some strides in the past 10 years about removing the stigma around mental health, and we're talking about it more. I know I talk about it a lot in my family. But then that means that we need access to mental health services. And that's not easy to come by. So there's a lot of gaps in access to health care. So there is no lack of reasons why we're here today. And these challenges make one thing clear, that our roles as parents are very important in our children's lives and making sure that they have good mental health. So the thing that I'm most excited about this panel is the three perspectives that we're going to hear from. We are going to hear from a clinical perspective, a research perspective, and the parent's perspective from these expert speakers. So I'm going to quickly introduce them to you, and you have their bios in the back of your paper so you can find out more. But on the research perspective, we have Dr. Emily Aaron. She's the medical director of the Early Childhood Mental Health Program at MedStar Georgetown. She's also an NIH-funded researcher studying social media's impact on youth mental health. She has dedicated to expanding psychiatric care in community and school settings and maintains a private practice for children and adults. Dr. Abigail Romanowski brings the clinical perspective. She's a clinical psychologist trained at the University of Maryland and Children's National Hospital. She's the owner of Perspective Health DC, which is a private practice in DC. She's particularly passionate about supporting parent mental health and parent-child relationships. And Claire brings the parent perspective. She is the president of the Arlington County Public Schools PTA, so the whole council for Arlington Public Schools. And she brings the voice of parents and communities into educational and mental health conversations. Now, the part that gives me the most excitement is our moderator. So Lisa, who's one of our board members, is also in this field. She is a therapist specializing in adolescents, families, couples, and parent work with a collaborative and strengths-based approach to healing and growth. She brings decades of experience working with diverse populations around the world with a clinical focus on anxiety, depression, trauma, grief, and major life transitions. So, speaking of the board, we have a board that's 11 members. We have about 5 or 6 of us here in the room. I'm sure you know who they are. Nicole is not here. Barrett, she's the chair of our communications committee. Colleen Brown was here for a moment and had to leave us, but we have Maureen Diamond, our treasurer. Diana Eisenstadt's not with us, Susan Brober's not with us. Morgan will be here, you'll recognize her. She'll be hopefully with a brand new baby in her arms. So we're looking forward to seeing her, Morgan Hart. Nancy Reller is here with us, a former chair of our Communications Committee, Monica Schmoody, and of course Lisa. And we have an events committee that helped put this on with Julie Krakowski, or Julie over there, Candy McFarland is over there, Nicole Kendall and Allie are our help. But there was one name I left off. And that was the person who gets the most thanks for putting this on, and that's Lynn Carlo, who is the chair of our events committee. And she not only threw herself into this, she threw her whole heart into this event. Every detail has her personal touch on it. And this came at a time that wasn't the best time in her life to be doing this, since January 20th, if you know what I mean. So she had a few other things going on in her life, but she stood up and delivered. So what I'm asking you to do today is to join the conversation by asking questions. When it's time to ask questions, at least we let you know. But join the conversation. Use today's insights to bring positive change at home and in your community. Spread the word, bring a friend to events like this. We have more events. You'll hear more about that in a minute. Check out our resource page on the website. There's lots of great resources that these experts have recommended, and we posted them for you. So I will be back with more. You ready, Freddie?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Thank you, Paula.
Yes.
Is this good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm so happy that you're here, and I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so honored to be moderating this panel. As Paula said, we have 3 different perspectives here, and so we really get more of a holistic insight. And what I'd like to do is just launch right in, and then hopefully, I will stop us around 15 minutes, around 5:15 for a Q&A at the end. So if you can hold your questions until that time, I know you're going to start having a lot of them, and just so we can get through some of this great information, that would be great. All right, so I'm going to start, and I am going to direct this first question first to Claire, but I'd love all 3 of you to weigh in, and that is, from your own perspective and experience, what are the most common concerns and challenges you're hearing from parents when it comes to their children's mental health?
Hello, everyone. So I'll just start off with a caveat, a necessary caveat. These comments are my own, do not represent my employer, don't represent any organization I'm otherwise affiliated with. And just as a little bit of quick background, for about 4 years, I've been leading the Arlington County Council of PTAs. That is an umbrella organization of 35 local PTAs. And I'm just mentioning that because a lot of times, not everyone realizes that their local PTA is actually part of an entire layer of advocacy for children's well-being at the local, the county, the state, and the national level. So that is the experience of working on those issues for the last 4 years. That's what's kind of informing some of what I'm going to talk about today. So the short answer to the question, parents are often concerned about bullying. They're often concerned about harmful screen time, and they're often concerned about the lethality of drugs. I mean, substance abuse is no longer experimentation when one pill can kill, right? So those are the things, the short answer of a lot of what we're hearing. But I want to take a step back and just point out that those 3 things I mentioned are actually behaviors. It's not the mental health component, but they are behaviors and or symptoms, right? And so what I want to share and convey today is that parents are not all on the same page with how to address those symptoms and behaviors. What I've noticed over time is that, and this is a generalization, but there are kind of 2 camps, 2 frameworks that a lot of parents bring to these issues. And one framework might be the idea of creating external controls You know, we got to control what's around my child. The environment, we need to control who's accessing my child, and that's how we solve those problems. You know, so for example, you might find parents advocating for restrictions and literally physically grabbing and taking cell phones out of the schools, for example, right? That's an example of an external constraint to solve this problem. We actually also see parents who come at it from a different framework, who say, wait a second, I need to bolster the internal resources and internal controls of my child. The way to solve those problems is to work on how my child makes decisions. What is my child drawn to? How do they interact with their environment? And I'm just trying to highlight this framework because it's really important for anyone who's advocating on investments in mental health, because not all parents even see that as a solution to the problems, right? That's more of an internal resources solution. And just real quickly, I wanted to quote as an example of this kind of dynamic. I wanted to quote Sahej Korkoli. She's actually a Washington Post columnist. She does brown girl therapy. I don't know if any of you guys have read her column, but let me just give a quick quote from her. In my family and often in my culture, therapy is thought of as taboo. And most issues surrounding mental health care get grouped into a pile labeled white people stuff. In fact, taking care of yourself can be considered selfish. After all, I grew up in a collectivist culture where I was expected and encouraged to prioritize family and community over everything else, including myself. I just wanted to mention that to kind of highlight there's a big dynamic at play that it benefits everyone from just understanding. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. That was really actually very interesting to listen to. Hi, everybody. I'm Abigail. I, have some research training, clinical training, but most of what I do on a daily basis is work with individual kids and parents and families. So that's kind of the perspective that I'm coming from. And hearing what Claire was describing, I found myself imagining the many more than two camps that I feel like I hear from when I talk to parents. And I think I don't see that necessarily as a barrier. I think it's normal for each parent and each family to come at it from a certain place, and I think we'll have opportunity to talk a little bit more about that. To the question of what I hear the most, I definitely hear a lot of concerns about screens. And I hear a lot of concerns about how children and teenagers' relationships might predict their relationships in adulthood, as well as kind of their exposure to different kinds of relationships during that time. And I also just hear a lot of parents worrying about their kids worrying and their anxiety, but really actually what I hear most is all the themes underneath that, which are kind of these underlying concerns, which I think are shared by many parents across different kinds of spectrums, which is basically, is my child going to be okay? If things are hard right now, is this my fault? And how can I fix it? Which is why in my practice, I often start work with parents before I go directly to therapy with children. There's a lot of research and a lot of clinical experience to suggest that trying to build that relationship with parents and help them feel supported can bring a lot of relief more quickly. And also the scope of things that are actually appropriate to intervene with or support through direct child therapy is much narrower than people think. I'm always both flattered and horrified by the fact that sometimes it feels like parents feel like I have kind of like magic that I do, and I'll like get in their kid's brain like a mechanic with a car. And so, you know, certainly like the desire for that support is great, but I'm just really excited we're talking about the parent pathway to that, because I get a lot of fulfillment from doing that work, and it's really important.
Hi everyone. I'm really thrilled to be here, and I will just add on to what was already mentioned, because I agree with everything that's been said so far. I do want to give a disclaimer that I like to say that whatever I say is rated NPG, no parental guilt, for everybody in the room. Because when we talk about parenting and we talk about kind of best practices or what we would recommend, I mean, a lot of feelings often come up in ourselves, and it happens to me too. I'm a parent too, so I just really want to just set the stage by we all just need to do good enough, and always keep that in mind. And these are just some things to build off of doing good enough. So no guilt. You can brush it aside. And I think for what I see parents most concerned about for their children is exactly what has already been mentioned. You know, will my child be okay? One definition of mental health is loving well and working well. And some people have added on loving well enough and working well enough, which I like better. And so I think that that is really the overarching thing that parents are concerned about. Will my child be okay? Will they be successful in those two areas? And I also keep in mind right now, Melissa Smalls is an anthropologist, and she wrote a book called Our Babies Ourselves. And she has this quote that really stuck with me, that parenting is the vessel through which culture asserts itself. And right now our culture is a bit chaotic because there's so much change that happens so rapidly, and it's really hard for parents to predict what the future will look like. And so parents are themselves stressed and because of that, and so then we see that manifesting in what we see in our office. That aside, there are real issues that children come to us with that we can help them with, but it's always good to keep parents in mind so we can support parents, because I work with a very diverse population, socioeconomically, racially, culturally, ethnically, and you know, one of the biggest things I can support is the parent-child relationship, because that buffers so much around adversity and really supports resilience no matter what the issue is.
Thank you. This next question is also for all three, but I'm going to direct it first to Abigail. And that is, why are early relationships so crucial for a child's emotional development? And then part two of that question is, how do a parent's own experiences shape their caregiving? It's kind of a biggie. But
No pressure. No pressure. I'm going to flip the order, actually. I find it easier to think about it almost kind of in chronological terms. So I think first about us as parents and how we are inevitably shaped by our experiences. And then about the fact that we are then part of our children's shaping to a certain extent in the beginning. And I think, you know, this is actually not what I learned in graduate school, and I hope this is changing, but what ends up being true is that no matter how much you read, no matter how much you learn, no matter how many years you go to graduate school and all of those things, in reality, 90% or more of in-the-moment parenting is automatic behavior. And that is as it should be. That's an evolutionary advantage if we were using our whole brain for every interaction with our kids. We would not be able to do anything else, and I'm not convinced that that would be so great for our kids either. But because of that, we're inherently reactive. And so in most situations when we're with our kids, what we do is primarily guided by our automatic thoughts and our most prominent emotions. And those thoughts and those emotions stem from the story that we have leading up to that point. This is where the stereotypes of therapy come from. A lot of the content of that story ends up being, in part, our relationships, not just our early parent-child relationships, but our relationships up until that point. And so I would say that even just being aware that you are being reactive most of the time, and that you can't control each of those interactions, but the more you can do to kind of get to know yourself and what your story is, and what some of those emotions are, what some of those thoughts are, and perhaps where some of those things are coming from. I think often parents are really pleasantly surprised by how much that work changes their in-the-moment interactions with their kids. And there's a whole lot of reason to believe that those interactions with our kids, not the one-off interaction, but the build-up over time of those interactions, are what becomes the story that our kids hold. So I think that would be my best way of answering that one.
I have a lot to add on to that, but I think there's also concepts about angels in the nursery and ghosts in the nursery. This is from Alicia Lieberman, who runs the child parent psychotherapy program at UCSF. And she studied under Selma Freiberg. I don't know if people have read The Magic Years. It's one of my favorite books about raising young children. And she started the whole concept about infant psychotherapy. And so we come to parenting, it's a really interesting and rich time because it activates a lot of things that were really deep. And it gives us these opportunities to recognize some things that might have happened early on, especially if there's a trauma story there, but even if there isn't, things that you might have experienced, and an opportunity to look at it anew with fresh eyes based on your new relationship that you have with your baby. And so sometimes there are these ghosts, but there's also an opportunity to recognize the angels of your past. And so that's where we also focus and shine a light on resilience and an opportunity to say, okay, well, maybe this person, my mom, did something that was really negative over time and that was painful, but I also had a grandma or an aunt or my next door neighbor that did a lot of really wonderful things for me, and that was a wonderful relationship, and it's an opportunity to explore, to then lean on that in those moments, especially moments of stress. I think people often do great things, but parenting is super stressful, especially really young children. So it's an ability to kind of think about things more consciously and bring that into the nursery that's being created.
I love this because I'm hearing themes, even though we didn't coordinate in advance. So, quick show of hands. How many people here know their own adverse childhood experiences score? Okay, for those who are watching, the video recording, one other person other than me does. So it's important, and here's why. If parents do not know their own level of exposure to childhood trauma, how exactly are we expecting them to identify it with their own child, understand, prevent it, mitigate it, address it? Like, how exactly is that going to work? So When we were working and responding to the community, their concerns on substance abuse, children's mental illness, we were looking at like doing the research. Okay, how do we tackle these problems? And so much of the research kind of points to a smoking gun of childhood trauma. And so in looking more at that, I want to just give some examples, concrete examples. If you have exposure to 4 or more adverse childhood experiences that happened to you before age 18, and I know that there's some critique about what's an adverse childhood experience. There's a lot of people who are expanding that list and definition, what counts, but putting that aside, if you have 4 or more of these kind of events and experiences, you are 740% more likely to experience alcoholism in your life. You are 1,200% more likely to attempt suicide. This is not small, right? So how are we going to address some of these issues if we don't start looking upstream and talking about childhood trauma? And now here's the other aspect to this. This is why, asking about what does the parent understand their own exposure. Increasingly, scientists are able to start pinpointing the mechanisms of where childhood trauma impacting one generation actually biologically and behaviorally transmits to the second generation, and it even transmits to the third generation. There are ways with chronic inflammation being passed down. There are ways of depression being passed down. And then there's also, I love the part about the kind of automatic reactivity. There are these trauma responses that as a parent you're used to, that's behaviorally, right? How you're interacting with your children and kind of passing along the trauma. There's the saying, hurt people, and it's really unfortunate, but it also happens in families and through generations. And so one of the things that's just pointing out, when I was pregnant and getting prenatal care in DC, they had the law says you have a universal screening for HIV. The idea being, how do we inform people of their HIV status, pregnant women, at a time when they can take action to prevent transmission to the next generation, right? We are starting to see expanded universal screening, or at least proactive screening for postpartum depression. We're making progress on that. Again, this idea of how do we screen people, they may not all know it themselves, to provide resources at a time to prevent that transmission of trauma to the next generation. And yet, at the same time, as a society, and we've seen this when we're trying to advocate for this, there's a lot of pushback on any screening of parents or children at any stage on childhood trauma. There is pushback. So I just want to leave that here, and we can talk later offline or something about why there's valid reasons, but this continues again to the point of, help the parents at these moments so that it doesn't get transmitted to next generations.
Thank you. And yes, that's a big question. So conversations will ensue, I'm sure. So I'm going to move. This is geared more to Abigail and Emily. What does it mean to be a safe base for a child, and how does this support their behavior, emotions, and overall mental health? I'll start with you.
So one piece of the prior question that also overlaps with this question is that why it's important for emotional development for children to understand the parents' experiences and how that interplays. And so when parents are regulated, their children have an easier time regulating. And there are a lot of mediating and moderating factors. But the early years, 0 to 5, are really crucial in brain development. And about 90% of our brain is formed by the time we're 5 years old. And it's about, I think, 2 million connections being formed. We're born with all of our neurons. Maybe we create a few, but basically we're born with all of our neurons, and it's the synapses, so the pathways between neurons, that are created at a very rapid pace early on. So that's how these different psychologies get passed down between generations, as Claire was referencing. Well, that's one way. So safe base for a child. So to be a safe base, what that means is that this references attachment theory. So I'm not sure how familiar people are with attachment theory, but I think generally the public knows that attachment is important. And it's actually a biological need. It's a biological drive that we see across species, right? So, but in humans, we need to get nutrients from our mom in order to survive, but we also need to be able to explore to survive. And so we have this biological drive to stay close to our caregiver, but then also to go out to explore. And these are the two processes that we need to see. And so the safe base or safe haven is someone who allows you to come close when you need it, and also to go out and explore and to support both of those things. So there's actually an intervention called Circle of Security, which really is a great way to provide, it provides a really wonderful illustration and cohesive model of what a safe base is and what the mechanisms of a safe base is and where things can go awry. Sorry, I'm just looking to make sure I stay on topic here. And so this is, attachment is actually really key. It's hard to measure, so we don't actually really measure it very well. And I do a lot of thinking around what we should measure and how we should measure it, and I wish there was an easier way to do this, because attachment is so key in so many ways in terms of providing healthy development and mental health. And so again, this is an important buffer and when people experience adversity. So just because you've experienced an ACE, since that's come up in early childhood, adverse childhood experience, does not mean that you necessarily will go on to, one, identify yourself as experiencing trauma, because that is actually something that even if you have a traumatic event happen to you or an adverse event, you don't necessarily think of it as trauma. And this safe base principle and the parent-child relationship is so crucial. That's what studies show in buffering someone from going on to suffer after they've had an adverse experience.
I'm so glad we went in that order so that you could do the attachment context. Because I deal with this much more on an individual level, and so I kind of think about the secure base as how I end up explaining it and talking it through with parents so that they can kind of think about how they can be their most authentic version of a secure base for their kids. And because I happen to work a lot in the area of parent and child anxiety, a lot of what we end up talking about is the secure base is kind of the sitting in a space where you're kind of transmitting this message of, I'm okay, you're gonna be okay, and I'm here for you. Because even if we're talking about kids who have one or fewer adverse child experiences, people are very worried about how their kids are gonna do. And one of the things I often get frustrated about is the number of books there are on pregnancy and how the culture emphasizes reading about this period of time where you maybe have a little bit of control, but not as much as you would like to. And I wonder what it would be like if we were acculturated to spend that reading time, reading about what's typical across child development, even if at least it's for ages 0 to 5. Because what I end up seeing a lot of is what I think of as the pathologizing of struggle. And when parents see their kids struggling, they start to worry. And then they start to worry there's a problem, and then they feel like they have to fix it. But we as a society need to do a better job helping parents know from day one that struggle is the active ingredient for growth, and a child's job is to grow. And so it's not supposed to be an easy, smooth time, which also, by the way, means that especially early parenting is also not supposed to be an easy, smooth time. And to be clear, there are many children, and I spend a lot of time with them in my practice, who have clear reasons to be getting additional intervention. But I spend about 40% of my clinical time directly talking with parents and having conversations about what's considered to be normal but difficult, and what's considered to be concerning relative to what is normal at their age, and therefore we should think about the appropriate interventions. And that often comes back to the secure base. And I tell parents a lot of time, like, you don't have to really believe all the things you're trying to display, right? Like, you can be worried, but pretend you're not worried. Because what ends up happening is that it is the behaviors that we do as parents that transmit these messages to kids about whether we're okay, whether they're okay, whether we can handle it when they're not okay, and whether we're available to them when they need to kind of check back in, because our job is to create that space where they can then grow and explore and be curious. And a lot of the work ends up being done internally in the parent so that they can be that for their kids. And that happens to be a particularly gratifying part of my work. And I suspect Emily feels that way too. And there's actually nothing more fun than to be able to tell parents, actually, no, that's really, really hard, but there's actually no reason to worry. And so let's talk about how you can show up in those moments in a way that perpetuates growth as opposed to gets in the way.
Thank you. Just as an aside, I was thinking about what you were saying. And I remember, so my husband sitting here is the token man. And we were planning to move across the country, and I called my mom and said, how am I going to break it to the kids? And she said, Lisa, they will take your leave. So it's not breaking it, it's like, guess what? And so it's very, very poignant to me as a parent, yeah. Okay, moving right along, and this is a biggie. I'm going to direct it to Emily because she actually has hard data on this subject. So this is not just her opinion here. This is something she studies. In today's busy tech-filled world, what should parents prioritize to support their children's emotional well-being, including how to manage screen time and seek help for mental health concerns?
Thank you. Big question. And as Claire mentioned, I think there are different approaches to this and some very strong opinions. But I will answer it from the data that we have, because this is a very hard thing to study. That's the number one thing I've learned as a researcher in this area. And we're still filling in the gaps. I think of basically everything in mental health through a developmental lens. So this answer changes based on the age of the child. But since we're talking about parents, I think parents are the number one place to start. And I think it's really just important to know that there's a whole industry behind screens now that really specialize in addictive design. I mean, that's not a secret, and everybody knows it. And so we're on our screens all the time, and I'm addicted to my phone. I pick it up. I looked at how many times I picked it up, and it was ridiculous. It's a ridiculous number compared to when I used to have a flip phone. So I always, when parents are open to having the discussion, starting with parents, modeling is so important. Our children take much more from us by what they see us doing than by what we tell them, especially as they get older. It's so much easier when they're little. But as they get older, they really take a cue from us. So, and that happens over time. It's not a one thing, you know, it's really about patterns. So kind of thinking first about oneself is what I would tell parents. For little kids, I think it's important to think about the fact that this is a wonderful time when you have so much control over your child's environment. So take advantage of that and teach them those skills. So there are some really interesting studies now that show that children, it's bi-directional. So there are children who have a harder time regulating. That's their temperament. We're going to talk about temperament. And so they're probably more likely to be given a screen when parents are busy, they're at the grocery store, they're finally going out for a cup of coffee or lunch with a friend, and they needed to bring their little one with them. We've all done it. It's okay, but I think it's just important to kind of be aware of that, and also try to find times when you do other things other than give a phone or a tablet to a child so that they can learn that struggle. That struggle really is important. And that ability to self-regulate. But we see in studies that actually we see white matter changes, and we see increases in developmental concerns and dysregulation when there's heavy screen use, especially in children who are probably more at risk. We hear a lot about social media impact on mental health, especially around adolescent girls with depression and anxiety. But attention is another thing that's really heavily impacted. And again, children who are maybe more at risk genetically, or they are more likely to then potentially cross over into ADHD or other attentional executive function issues if they have heavy screen use. And again, that's probably a bidirectional association or correlation, because if you have that makeup, then you're probably more likely to be using screens or have a parent that gives you screens. So again, just environment is much easier to control early on. So creating good habits and avoiding giving your child a tablet, because that's usually what's most likely at that age, like the 0 to 10. And then having very explicit conversations with children about what the risks are. And that's what I did with my children. You know, this is the science. Let me teach you about your brain. Let them in on it. Don't just tell them, but let them understand in a developmentally appropriate way. I will say 10, 11 is very hard, because suddenly it doesn't actually matter what the environment is that you created, because now they care much more about the environment at school and with peers. And so you can do all the great things, but now even if they don't have a screen, they're going to suffer if they don't have a way to communicate with their friends. So there are now some really great options that are becoming more popular and less stigmatizing, like a pinwheel phone or a Gab phone that don't have internet access but still allow children to use texting and calling and Spotify and things like that. But it's still hard because now kids don't even text, they use Snapchat. So that's where I think community is really important, right? We exist in ecosystems. It's not just about what happens in your household, it's about what happens in your school and your community, and then further out from there. So really having conversations early on before it becomes an issue with other parents. And then, it's okay to say no. This is actually something that I find a lot of parents struggle with, is saying no and setting limits with their children, and it's uncomfortable, but I think delay is really, really crucial. So there's a study about identity formation in young children, and I don't know, people probably read The Anxious Generation in this room, and he talks about this study. But identity formation is still happening, and whether or not one feels part of the culture or not. And so at 15, 16 is when people have a firmer set of who they are, and I mean, it continues to develop, but they also kind of have a memory of it. So delaying as much as possible exposure to social media and things that are addictive by design, I think is really, really key. And then just keeping an open form of communication. And then the other piece, I don't want to go on and on because there's so much to say about this topic, but the other piece is kind of how parents use technology with their children. And there can be some real pros there, and then there can be some ways that it kind of can be either too much or too little. So I'll just leave it there. Do you want to say just a second?
I think from a concrete individual perspective, one of the things I end up working with parents on is to actually go a little bit deeper into what is screen time and how many different types of screen time there are. So, maybe later you could educate me about what the research is on this at this point, but I think any parent who's been with a kid knows that a 3-year-old who's watching old videos of Mr. Rogers is having a different experience than a 3-year-old who's playing interactive video games. And so I really encourage parents to use their gut sense and their observations about where their kids are and think about their temperament and what they need, and to think about the screen not as it is different than you should never give drugs to kids, like illegal drugs, obviously. But to make screens be in that category, I think is part of what induces a lot of guilt. And so to think about the variability and what those things are can be really helpful for parents. So helping them understand that one of the most dangerous types of screen use at the youngest age is that high stimulation interactive version. And when we're working with kids and families individually, you have what some people are calling a screen addiction, but essentially a situation where if the parents are trying to end screen time, their kids really have explosive tantrums that can get dangerous at times. We end up thinking a lot about a stepping down approach in terms of high stimulation levels and helping kids learn about the difference between chilling out to an episode of a TV show that has characters and narrative and stories and information versus repetitive, kind of addictive screen time things. And so that's the one thing I would say. And then the other thing I would say is I'm not convinced that there's any downside emotionally for kids being the one who didn't have the phone. And maybe somebody will do research on this and prove me wrong, but until that happens, I haven't been convinced of that. And so I would strongly urge parents to feel comfortable saying, sorry, that's our decision, to kids who are feeling like, but so-and-so has this and so-and-so has that. I've never seen any evidence of that being a factor in kids being not successful, not happy, not well-adjusted later on.
We're both unscheduled. A few other remarks. I'll keep it brief. You can say no to your kids. Be ready. So, for example, I'll give a story. Parent says, no, child, you cannot have Snapchat. We're going to lock down apps. You're not going to have access to Snapchat. Parent discovers an old burner phone hidden in the room that had been disabled, but the child had figured out how to I can't even say what, like reload some sort of operating system to at least use the Wi-Fi in the house to get Snapchat. So be ready. It's not even a matter of like, can you say no? It's like, how do you become a white hat hacker in your own house?
That's it. I need to open it to mic. Is that not working?
Is it working?
Yeah, it's working.
Okay, I think we just turned that off. Right, shut us down. Too much electronics, clearly. Okay, we're gonna just, I have so many things I would like to say, but we're gonna move on. This is a really important one to me. This came up a lot for me as a parent when my kids were little. When parents make mistakes or feel overwhelmed, how can they recover in a way that preserves trust and emotional safety? Start with you.
Thank you.
Let's just swap it out. There you go.
Thank you. You might regret letting me go first because I'm actually going to disagree with the premise of the question, which is just to say that what I find myself thinking about immediately when I hear a question framed like this is like, wow, somehow we've all been convinced that making mistakes hurts our kids. And it does not. There is every reason to believe that the trust between parents and kids and the sense of emotional safety that kids have is actually predicated on being able to see their parents being imperfectly human and being able to watch them go between having it together and not having it together. And so, and maybe this is just me, and maybe you're going to start getting bored of me saying, but actually there's good news. But to me, I feel very strongly about sifting out all of the assumptions parents have in the atmosphere that actually are not predicated on any amount of research or developmental psychology whatsoever, which gives them more room to then have more space to be ready when they say no, or be with their kid instead of giving them a screen. So I'm actually going to just give that very short answer to that question.
Okay, I'm going to talk about parents being overwhelmed. That's endemic right now. And actually last year, the US Surgeon General released a report on parent stress. And one of the findings he said was 48% of parents say most days their stress is completely overwhelming. And that's compared to 26% of adults who are not parents. I mean, that's like, it's endemic. And so I do want to say, definitely, if you're overwhelmed as a parent, you are not alone. And I want to take a moment to say, let's all have really deep compassion for ourselves as parents. And frankly, our society is letting us down. Our society is failing to support us, shoving way too many decisions and responsibilities on just individuals at a time when they don't have a lot of free time. And it's just like, oh, and by the way, the standards have raised to be impossible. So that's the perfect storm. So just like really deeply have a moment of compassion for yourselves and other parents, as often as you can. now, of course, the question is like, okay, yeah, fine, but what can you do about it? And I'm almost wanting to leverage a little bit before, again, about this reactivity, what those triggers are, and understanding. So first of all, saying to yourself, yes, I am going to have triggers, these kind of just weird, irrational, big reactions to things. But the thing is that the thing that triggers you is not necessarily the thing that triggers me, and vice versa. So being a little curious about, at the time, when you're triggered, it feels universal. Like, well, anybody would have this reaction to this outrageous provocation. But it's not true. So being curious about what your own triggers are, and especially if some of those are responses to those kind of trauma, early trauma, inherited modeling that you saw your parents had big responses to, all of that can help you handle the overwhelm in at least a way that doesn't dig you in the hole deeper, is maybe the way to put it.
Just going to add one thing. Well, I'm just going to give you a word to think about, which is repair, and repair is always possible. So no matter what happens, there's a way to repair. And I totally agree that being imperfect is good. It teaches our children how to grow up into thriving adults. So actually being a perfect parent and not making mistakes is actually worse. So, but repair is also good. So if we do mess up, it's okay. Exactly, when we mess up every day.
Phew. Okay, I'm going to direct this toward Abigail. She had alluded to this earlier. How can understanding your own particular child's temperament help parents respond with empathy, especially when their child seems different from their peers?
Sure. Oh, I'm going to be so nerdy by defining it, but so temperament came from these researchers in, I think, maybe the 30s or the 50s out of NYU, and Thomas and Chess, and they were able to identify these 9 variables that they looked at, like rhythmicity, which is basically like, do they have a rhythm throughout their day? And anybody who has babies know that some do, some don't. Sleeping, eating, soothing. So I can't remember all 9. And then they basically found that babies fell into 4 categories. So it was slow to warm up, easy or something like that, and then difficult, and then one was unclassified. And so that was the original temperament study. But the important thing about the temperament study wasn't just that the babies had a temperament, it was that the parents do too, and it's something called goodness of fit. And so some temperaments go together and some don't. And we don't talk about this enough probably clinically, but it's actually really helpful. And then there's another temperament called behaviorally inhibited that another researcher named Jerome Kagan out of Mass General, Harvard, he came up with, which is a little bit different. But I think that the Thomas and Chess is the more traditional way we think about temperament. And there's actually something I'll just briefly mention. It's called the Infant Temperament Tool. And so parents can use this. It's actually on the Georgetown website. It's called the Thrive Center. And so you can fill out this survey, and it tells you what your temperament is and what your child's temperament is, and then some activities you can do together based on your temperaments, which I think is lovely.
Thank you. I'm so glad I asked you because it's much more technical that way. Luckily, when I am talking about temperament, it ends up just being easy or difficult, or structured or unstructured, or calm or active, and whatever labels you put on it. I think what Emily's alluding to, and the other piece that I wish we read about during pregnancy instead of all the other stuff, is the normativity of there being different temperaments. everyone in this room falls into multiple temperament categories. There's no defined normal or abnormal temperament, good, bad, and they're mostly biologically wired in. So your baby comes out with a temperament, there's a range of experiences that they might have that will kind of propel them in different places, but you don't get to choose your temperament and you don't get to choose your kid's temperament. And so, again, one of the conversations I often have with parents is, one of the most common examples is like a parent who was super conscientious, followed all the rules, never bucked authority, things like that. And then they have a kid who seems to have been doing that basically since they came out. And if you don't think about temperaments, you go directly to, oh my God, I ruined them, or there's something wrong with them, or there's something wrong with their brain. And the beautiful thing that I've seen happen when parents start to think about their own temperaments, and then kind of like, I will often ask parents, like, does your kid remind you of anybody in your family of origin or your extended family? And then we'll get to talk about how those are different temperaments, and then the stories you have about how people came to be who they were may be really crowding out what you're feeling about who your kid is. And to be really clear, I don't really work with parents and kids who both have easy temperaments. Like, they don't come into my clinical office, but I like to joke that I know they're out there, like the science tells me that. I didn't birth any of them. But I think what it does is it takes down the temperature on what you're thinking about when you see your kid being difficult, or you experience yourself having a difficult time with your child, because there's clear data to suggest that some parents have an easier time with some kids and some parents have a harder time with some kids. So as soon as you pull out the possible explanation that you did something wrong or there's something wrong with them, it opens up this whole place to be like what Claire was saying, to be curious about yourself, to be curious about your kid. And as soon as you adopt one of those more kind of like curious, non-judgmental mindsets, your emotional reactivity goes down. And then you also get to think about who your kid was from the get-go and what kind of expectations you might have had that had no reason for being expectations for this kid, and it gets to change your whole thing. So you get to think about, how is my kid different from their sibling, from me, from their friend, and what would serve my kid? And there is quite a lot of information, more and more, especially in the research and the information on concepts like neurodiversity, where you get to think about parenting your kid in terms of who they are. And of course, this is relevant for screens. Like, some kids will have a harder time, and it's helpful to be able to tell parents that, oh, so-and-so cousin just gives back the iPad, but like when we're at the beach house, my kid won't give it back. And we get to talk about temperament and how it wasn't their quote unquote bad parenting early on that made that happen. And I think you would be surprised by how much just that mind shift opens things up for being yourself and being with your kid.
Well, I think along those lines, what a gift to give to your kid and to yourself of, I'm different than you.
Absolutely.
You never know, so you like it this way.
Absolutely.
How do we work together with it?
Absolutely.
Or I meet your needs and she meets hers, and what a gift to give them, as opposed to, I wish you were this way, or you wish you were like me.
Yeah. And actually, thank you for reminding me, because what that ends up doing, back to the parent-child relationship, is that it gives you an opportunity as a parent to say, I was different as a kid. That's not who you are. Teach me about who you are. Tell me about your experiences. And that is very reparative. It's very informative. And then it lets you think about that exact situation in a very different way, and sets things up. The last thing I'll say is my favorite line from a book that I think I put on the resources, is that parenting matters, but it only matters a little. And so any ideas that you have that what your kid is because of you and you've made them, like, there's no evidence to suggest that. And so you just get to kind of like pick back up and try again. Yeah.
And I've noticed in my practice, when I see adult families, that same dynamic, you know, the 70-year-old parent who's frustrated with the 45-year-old child, right? And I talk about, you know, what are some activities that you can do together, right? So, yeah. So the timing has been great. You three of you have been so erudite. It's been amazing. And we're going to take questions after this last question, but I'd like to open this to the three of you again from your three different lenses. And that is, so we're talking about kind of our own kids, but how can we advocate for better mental health resources for kids and families in our community?
So I want to talk about how, and I also want to talk about why. So in terms of how, believe it or not, what you are doing today is really critical. Joining forces, being proactive, joining organizations, having collective viewpoints that you could then go and leverage, and anticipating problems, getting out ahead of them as a group. That's just super critical. There's, you know, obviously this organization, multiple organizations in multiple different ways, right? And no one told me to say that. So that's truly what I believe. And I want to mention a little bit about why. And you know, maybe I'm still in this binary, like parents tend to fall into these two, you know, binary camps I keep seeing. But you've got a lot of parents who are comfortable and used to advocating on behalf, like to benefit individuals, their individual child or themselves or their family. And maybe some of that is because they have the financial resources, like, you know, oh, well, do I really need to worry about the collective? Oh my God, you know, public schools, public transportation, public health. I'll just find a way to help the individuals in my life, and I can do that. And then there are other parents, okay, there we go. And then there are other parents who are much more comfortable using, kind of advocating on behalf of the collective, on behalf of others, on behalf of the community. And I kind of alluded to that earlier on with a quote. That's the tool that they are comfortable with. I really encourage all parents to get at least a little practice with both tools. You're gonna have one that's your go-to, but in a whole long life, that one may not be the right tool for the job in all cases. So you're gonna need to advocate for collective goods, for societal goods, for betterment of your whole community, and you're gonna need to be able to demonstrate to your child, here's how I fight for you as an individual in particular. And I want to give an example of each just to try to like sell this. And I hope the examples aren't like offensive to anyone, but let's say that you're more used to advocating on for individual benefits. And then it turns out your child is in need of hospitalization. You know, they're in a mental health crisis and they need overnight stay at a hospital. And that's when you find out that there's a shortage of beds, not even just in your community, at your state, your whole area, right? It's too late at that point to advocate for that communal good of sufficient, you know, hospital beds for youth suffering from a mental health crisis. It's not going to help your kid at that point either, and you can't just solve it through individual advocacy. As another example on the flip side, right? Let's say, you know, you are used to modeling to your child, hey, you need to think about the collective needs, you know, respect authority. You need to sometimes put yourself last because there's the collective good. Is that child going to come to you and and tell you about like sexual abuse that they're experiencing at the hands of an authority figure in that community? Is that going to happen? So I'm just giving those as examples where one tool isn't necessarily going to meet that moment and the other tool isn't. So I really encourage parents to have a little bit of familiarity with whatever tool you're not as used to using. So that's like, you know, you can actually deploy, and you can show your kids how to use both tools. So.
Thank you, Claire. I think that's very helpful reminder. And Emily, I'm sure you did some of your training there too, and you see it all the time at Georgetown. There's nothing that evens the playing field than your kid going through something, whether it's medical or psychiatric. So I guess what I would say is, on an individual level and an individual family level and individual relationship level, have the courage to be more vulnerable, have the courage to be less perfect. Try to find your version of strength in vulnerability, because the more we pull down those walls and model that, then the more the collective society and individual kids see examples of reaching out and taking care of each other and asking for help and giving help. We have done a wonderful job at destigmatizing the seeking of mental health care, but we haven't done as good of a job at pulling down the walls just generally. So that's, I think, the thing I would leave.
So when I think about mental health resources, I think about the mental health system, which is complex and full of challenges and very imperfect. And it also is kind of state to state, city to city. And then I also think about what's outside of the mental health system. So schools, child care centers, pediatric offices. And that's a lot of the work that we do, actually, to think about novel and innovative ways to support mental health and support the system. I think what people can do in terms of the actual mental health system is just to be aware, read the news, understand how it's being impacted. The latest Big Beautiful Bill Act is affecting Medicaid. That is definitely going to affect the mental health system. How can you get involved on a local level to be engaged in policymaking and how to support the mental health system? I think that's going to be really crucial going forward, because there's actually a lot of great things that Medicaid does for children in terms of health and mental health, and hopefully children won't be as impacted, but they likely will, and their parents will, and we know that parent mental health is really key. And then schools and are also a big place where we can provide a lot of mental health supports. So being engaged with schools and seeing what they need. They're very overwhelmed, but also they really are on the hook to provide a lot of supports for kids. So we need to make sure that they have what they need and be a partner with them. And then on the other hand, I think about prevention and health promotion and what we can do as parents and as communities. And so really leaning into, again, modeling and creating opportunities for kids to be healthy and to support mental health. So having a sense of awe, going into nature, creating hobbies, being exposed to music. We know all of these things can really support good mental health. Feeling connected, knowing your neighbors, participating in community events, volunteering, having a sense of altruism. These things are a lot more important than a lot of things that we focus on and we don't have time for, but finding the time is really essential.
So we have about 9 minutes for questions. And I think if you have a question, we'll just come around to you with the microphone and just go ahead and raise your hand, I guess, and Lynn will come around to you. Hi, thank you so much for being here. This has been, I'm a mental health nurse, so 35 years of psychiatry, so this has been very great. And I have my coworker here who's a clinician herself. So my question to you is, and all the questions that Lisa posed to you and your answers, how do your answers change or differ? And do they change or differ when we are referring to a child of special needs?
So I see a lot of children with neurodevelopmental needs. So I would say no, because I'm thinking about them. And again, every child is different that we see and has different needs and has a different family. So I think broadly, in terms of mental health of children with special needs, I think I'm trying to remember how I answered my questions, but I think broadly I would say that the answers would stay the same. I would just think about, in terms of resources, that these children are vulnerable, especially when resources are taken away.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't change too many of my answers, other than to say that and it depends on the type of special need you're talking about, but certainly it changes the parent's experience of parenting, and to recognize that whatever the difficulties of parenting are with a child without significant special needs, that's exacerbated. So parents may not get the same kind of sense of like fulfillment or pride seeing, as they kind of anticipated they might. And so where can they kind of pull support to kind of stay in their parent mind with as positive mental health as possible. And it just frankly takes a lot more resources for a parent of a child with significant mental health needs or other kinds of special needs to maintain their positive mental health. And there's a serious gap in terms of the services that are provided for that. I actually have a client who I've seen for many, many years, and it took me with some genetic neurodevelopmental issues, and it took me years to convince her mom to start being willing to talk to me. Years, because she had been trained to conceptualize herself as just get the resources for my kid, and we started focusing a lot on who she wants to be relative to her kid as they grow up on their own trajectory. And we started to see how a lot of the roles that the parent was playing, because it was kind of partially medical and things like that, were really kind of inhibiting what's supposed to be warm and connecting about that parent-child relationship. And so getting some skilled nursing where there wasn't before ended up allowing for more of that opportunity for the mom to feel warmth toward her child. And it should be baked in more than it is formally, but even just changing the expectations around that, I think that's what I would say there.
Yeah. So one of the PTAs under our umbrella is the Special Education PTA. It's countywide, and it specifically seeks to address a lot of the issues with parents with kids with special needs. I wouldn't really change my answers. I would, if anything, just underline and add exclamation marks in some of these. So parent overwhelm level, yes. Concern with bullying, yes. Need for the whole community to advocate for support and resources, because those individual parents can't necessarily get their child's needs met on an individual basis. They need that community of support and professionals. Yes, I know, for example, in Arlington, certainly that school system has built out a level of support that other counties in Virginia actually transfer, like formally, students to receive education because of what the community has built to benefit kids with special needs. So emphatic, you know, for a lot of what I've described already.
Hi, my name is Lauren. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I actually got my start in social work working for the Laurie Center for the Infants and Toddlers program. So this is all bringing me back to those days, and especially love all the nods to Circle of Security. It's just such a wonderful framework. My question, so for years I've been really interested in the work of Nadine Burke-Harris, and I'm wondering if you all know of any work that's being done to maybe replicate some of the ACEs integration, screening integration, and community support that she's doing out in California and some other states around like this area.
I would just say that yes, at Georgetown, we have something called Community Pediatrics, and that's a part of what they do. So, yes.
Yeah, I looked for it. I mean, I really did, because I looked for, like, are we doing, I read her book, I saw her TED Talk, and I'm like, where are we in Virginia on this? And that's what I alluded to, that there is a lot of pushback, and it is not being, and I'm probably not the best person to describe this, but Nadine Burke-Harris sort of, and you'll remind me of her position, it was a formal position in California, I believe. Surgeon General California, thank you. And she launched an entire initiative to really treat childhood trauma as, you know, like a medical situation that the community needed to treat, just like lead in the pipes. Like, you know, she was really, and they built out a whole, you know, I think I read like most of the 200-page, you know, document. So I was looking for that. I don't think we're there. I think that there, and when I started approaching drug abuse counselors in schools, when I started approaching social workers, there was pushback. And I will try to, because I'm not trying to fully explain their point of view, but I'll just try to give hints. We already have our plates full with the problems that are on the surface, that are, you know, exhibited. You want us to screen for deeper problems? Do I even have the right professional requirements and skills to do that screening? Maybe I need a doctor to do it. Maybe I can't do it. The profession hasn't figured that out. If I start digging in and I find out that a student has all these other additional childhood traumas, and then there's no resources for me to, someone's like, yeah, it's tough to be you. Like, you know, so there are a lot of issues. Now, my response to this, this is my own, and I'm not a clinician, but I think being informed, as, you know, in a sort of age-appropriate way, that you have some risk factors for long-term health detriments. And can you do it in a way where, I know there's sensitivity, you can't doom these children. You can't tell them it's hopeless. You're just going to end up. So there's sensitivity with that. But equipping them with at least some information about, you know, when I see my kids try and experiment with drugs, but I know that I'm more likely to, like, I have higher risk factors. When I know that stress levels, right, that I'm probably more likely to have higher stress levels now and in the future because of what has happened. I think even if it's just like nothing else is done, but the child in a sensitive way is informed, I think that helps them. But I don't know that it's being done enough in my community.
I think the nature of trauma, I'm sorry, it's okay. Amy Casamano. I think the nature of trauma is shame and is things are hidden and there's still taboo around it many, many, many places. I mean, destigmatizing things as mental health and trauma is better than it used to be. Even the fact that we have ACEs now, you know, and a lot of people can identify that, oh, I had this, maybe that is why I'm this way or what I'm trying not to pass on to my kids, et cetera, et cetera. But I am curious about the next level and the next level of how to bring it out there more. Because I think I'm a therapist also, and I think we work on smaller levels a lot of the time, you know, which is necessary and helpful. And, you know, and I think you're talking about going to schools and community centers and things, but how do we, I don't know, government-wise, et cetera, maybe you have suggestions?
Oh, sorry, real quick, I don't have the government answer, but there is a really great, there is a really great website, ACEs Aware, that has a lot of very accessible tools for how to implement some of this, even as like a lay person, like community, like Stress Buster Kids and in school, so ACEs Aware, just putting in a quick plug for that.
I'm gonna, Henley's just gonna finish up with something, and then we're gonna have to wrap up this segment, and we're gonna have to over to Paul. Go ahead.
This is the best wrap up though. But I was just going to say there is a lot, even beyond ACEs, in terms of, like I was saying, for kids who are vulnerable or who are Medicaid recipients, there's something called early periodic screening diagnostic treatment. That is a federal rule that every child on Medicaid has to have that. And so ensuring that actually happens is another thing, but it's something that every child is entitled to. So increasing awareness so parents know that, and then that happens in the so pediatrics is actually a big part of the solution, and that's what we lean heavily on. There's also something called access lines. So somebody started mental health access lines in Massachusetts, and he actually scaled it so that in every state there's a mental health access line. So mental health clinicians, where there's a scarcity of mental health clinicians and psychiatrists specifically, and child psychiatrists even more so, that they can have an access line to pediatricians, or pediatricians can have an access line to mental health clinicians. And so HRSA, which is a government entity, they give a grant to every state. So every state has that. Whether that's getting clawed back, I don't know. But that's where policy also meets clinical practice and these innovative solutions to try to reach every child and screen for ACEs and developmental needs and mental health needs, and really lean on pediatricians where there's many more of them so that children can get that. And pediatricians are really stepping up. I mean, they do a lot of mental health care in this country, at least psychiatric.
So that reminds me of that talk about ACEs, Bruce Perry's book, What Happened to You. It's on resource page. You all should look at that. It's another discussion about this. And I did it again. I stood up here and talked and didn't introduce myself. Did I do that? I'm Paula Warner. So that's what you need to know about me. Okay, so I'm going to call your attention. Thank you for everything saying, but I'm going to call your attention to your packets. In the middle is a two-pager about some of our events, some of the things that we're doing. We've been operating under a strategic plan where we've had some goals for ourselves. I'm just going to call your attention to September 16th at the bottom of the first page. We're having a book signing with Isabel Howe. I don't know if you guys know Isabel Howe at all. She's out at Stanford, and she wrote a book, Love to Learn, and it's all about how important educators are to our children. So you might find that interesting. And then our countdown to World Mental Health Day, September 30th, is our big fundraiser at Strathmore. And you can see on the back page who we've recognized, who we're planning to recognize again this year. And really what this is all about is making a difference in the lives of children. And so I ask you to join us in that endeavor. I also would ask you to join me in thanking our panelists for this excellent presentation that we just had. We have a little something for you guys so you don't ever forget Champions for Children. And I have something for Lisa, and I have something for Lynn to thank everybody. But most importantly, let's don't let the food and the wine and the waste. Right?
Thank you.